Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a huge stack of sources. We've got everything from pulmonary physics to comparative anatomy.
And we're using it all to unpack the one thing you are doing right now without even a thought: breathing.
Right. It's the ultimate invisible process, isn't it?
It is. You might think of it as just, a simple mechanical act,
Yeah.
filling your lungs.
In out.
But the sources reveal that breathing is this sophisticated chemical and neurological balancing act. It's designed with just incredible precision to maintain perfect homeostasis inside your body.
Absolutely. Our deep dive is based on sources covering the mechanics of air movement, the shocking efficiency of oxygen transport by hemoglobin, the hidden pacemaker in our brainstem, and we're going to wrap it all up with the surprisingly dramatic evolutionary journey the lung took.
Our mission is to trace this whole process. We're following the air from the atmosphere on a journey governed by physics, across a membrane dictated by chemistry, and finally to this regulatory center where a single carbon waste product becomes the ultimate life or death decision maker.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start where physics meets anatomy, and that means Boyle's law.
Boyle's law is the absolute foundation. Simply put, for a fixed amount of gas, if you increase the volume of its container, the pressure drops.
CV equals K.
That's the one. And the body uses the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles as these levers, constantly changing the size of the container, which is your thoracic cavity.
So that's the core engine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you're just sitting quietly, the pressure in the space around your lungs, the intrapleural pressure, is hovering around, say, -5 centimeters of water.
Okay.
When you decide to take a breath, the diaphragm contracts, flattens, and the external intercostals pull the ribs up and out.
Which dramatically increases the volume of the chest cavity. And since volume and pressure are inversely related.
The pressure just plummets. That -5 can drop all the way to -8 at the peak of inspiration. And here's the crucial part. The pressure inside the air sacs themselves, the alveoli, drops from 0 to -1. Just a difference of 1 centimeter of water pressure. And that tiny gradient is enough to pull air rushing in from the outside world. It's this beautifully efficient, self-regulating engine.
That's incredible. The difference of a single unit of pressure makes the whole world rush in. And the path it follows is designed to protect that whole process.
It's an incredibly high-traffic, delicate system. The nasal cavity warms the air, humidifies it, and crucially, it pre-filters it with mucus and cilia.
Protecting the lower airways.
Right. Then the air passes through the pharynx and larynx into the trachea with those rigid cartilage rings so it never collapses, and then it just branches down through the bronchi, the bronchioles, and finally into the alveoli.
And that final stop, the alveoli, is where the scale of the operation, it just floors you.
It really does. You have about 300 million alveoli in each lung. If you were to flatten out the surface area of all those tiny air sacs, you would get approximately 75 square meters.
75.
75. We are carrying around a massive surface area, roughly the size of a doubles tennis court inside our chest, just for diffusing gases.
Wow. A tennis court for tiny little molecules to cross. That is a stunning biological investment. But the sources also noted that Boyle's law, as elegant as it is, doesn't always apply perfectly.
No, it works perfectly in the middle range of breathing. But at the extremes, when the lung is either totally deflated or completely full, the tissue loses its flexibility. The sources call this low compliance.
So it gets stiff.
It does. You need a gigantic change in pressure just to force a tiny shift in volume. The elasticity is gone.
Okay, so we have the physics that moves the air, but the fact that we don't have to consciously think about it is a whole other neurological marvel. Who's running this orchestra?
That conductor is the respiratory center, located deep in the brainstem, split between the medulla oblongata and the pons.
And within that center, we have a 3-part rhythm section. Let's break this down. What are these 3 groups of neurons doing?
Think of it like a mission control team. First, you have the dorsal respiratory group, the DRG. This is the autopilot.
Okay.
It sets the fundamental rhythm, that normal, quiet breathing we call apnea, and it initiates every single inspiration. The DRG also integrates all the sensory input coming in from chemoreceptors and stretch receptors.
So the DRG is the one that says, okay, time to start breathing. What about the ventral respiratory group, the VRG?
The VRG is the emergency turbocharger. It's usually completely quiet during normal breathing. It only kicks in when you need forceful, active breathing, like when you're sprinting or yelling.
So it forces air in and out.
Exactly. It has both inspiratory and expiratory neurons to do that. And finally, you have the pontine respiratory group, the PRG.
Which is the fine tuner.
It's the fine tuner. It controls the smoothness, the rate, the pattern. Within the PRG is the pneumotaxic center, which provides what the sources call the inspiratory off switch.
An off switch.
Literally. It limits how long you can breathe in, which keeps us from taking these huge, gasping breaths. It regulates the rate and the size of each breath to make sure the rhythm is smooth, not choppy.
It's just stunning that all of this, the sensing, the starting, the stopping, is all happening automatically, dozens of times a minute.
Yeah.
So once that perfectly regulated breath reaches that 75 square meter tennis court in the alveoli, we switch gears. We leave physics and neurology, and we enter pure chemistry.
Right, and now you need a messenger to grab the oxygen and move it.
Enter hemoglobin.
HB, a masterpiece of design. It's an oligomeric protein, meaning it's made of 4 chains, 2 alpha and 2 beta chains in adults.
And inside each chain is that binding pocket, the heme group.
Correct. Each heme group holds a ferrous iron atom, Feed+2, at its core. That iron atom is the anchor, the exact spot where oxygen binds.
And here's where the chemistry gets, it's just mind-bending.
Okay.
Cooperative binding. It's not just a simple molecule grabbing 4 oxygens.
Yeah.
The moment the first one binds, it changes everything for the other 3.
It's a major structural shift, an allosteric change. We classify hemoglobin into 2 states. The tense, or T state, which is deoxyhemoglobin and has a low affinity for oxygen.
And the relaxed, or R state.
Which is oxyhemoglobin, and it has a high affinity. When O2 binds to that iron atom, it literally pulls on the surrounding protein chains, causing the entire molecule to shift from that tight T state to the loose R state.
It's a conformational domino effect.
It is, and that's cooperativity. Because binding that first oxygen makes the whole molecule more relaxed, the second and third oxygens bind much, much more easily and faster than the first one did.
And that gives us the iconic S-shaped oxygen binding curve. What does that shape really tell us?
That S shape is the signature of efficiency. It means hemoglobin can load up almost completely in the high-pressure environment of the lungs, but then, and this is key, it can quickly dump its entire load in the tissues where the oxygen pressure drops, say down to 20 torr in an active muscle.
So it's built for rapid uptake and rapid release.
Exactly. And that rapid release is where the molecular effectors come in. Small molecules that regulate HB's capacity.
Especially the negative ones, the ones that force it to let go of oxygen.
Yes, and the most famous example is the Bohr Effect. It's driven by 2 waste products, hydrogen ions and carbon dioxide.
From active tissues.
Right. Active tissues produce both, lowering the local pH. When H+ and CO2 bind to hemoglobin, they stabilize that low-affinity tense state. This forces the curve to shift right, meaning hemoglobin releases oxygen right where it's needed most.
It's like the metabolic waste itself is signaling the oxygen delivery truck to stop and unload. What about 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate, 2,3-BPG?
2,3-BPG is this critical, persistent negative effector. It's always in our red blood cells. It binds in a central pocket and basically locks the molecule into that low-affinity T state.
So it's always encouraging oxygen release.
It is. And the body actually ramps up 2'3-BPG production during hypoxia when you're not getting enough oxygen to force hemoglobin to give up its cargo even more easily. It's an emergency supply measure.
And we can see the genius of this system when we look at fetal development, right? Where the competition for oxygen across the placenta is life or death.
Absolutely. Fetal hemoglobin, HbF, uses 2 gamma chains instead of the adult data chains. The key difference is that fetal HB has a lower binding affinity for 2'3-BPG.
So that negative effector can't bind as well.
Exactly. And because it can't, fetal HB maintains a higher intrinsic oxygen saturation. This lets it essentially steal oxygen right from the mother's blood, making sure the developing fetus gets priority supply.
This whole complex system, all of it, is ultimately aimed at one goal: maintaining that incredibly tight range of blood pH.
Homeostasis is everything. Your blood has to stay between pH 7.35 and 7.45. Any deviation is serious, and that balance is maintained by internal buffers, the kidneys, and the lungs.
The lungs regulate the volatile acid component, which is carbonic acid, H2CO3, so breathing controls CO2 pressure. The kidneys, they regulate the base, bicarbonate.
And when the lungs fail in that duty, you get respiratory acid-base disorders. If you retain CO2, your PCO2 goes above 40 millimeters of mercury, your pH drops below 7.4. That's respiratory acidosis.
And what causes that?
It can be structural issues like VQ mismatching where airflow is blocked. It can be mechanical where the muscles are impaired. We see that in severe conditions or even electrolyte deficiencies. And clinically, we see it all the time from medications like opioids or heavy sedatives that suppress the respiratory drive itself.
And respiratory alkalosis is just the opposite.
Correct. You blow off too much CO2, the PCO2 drops below 40, and the pH goes up. Causes can be hyperventilation because you're sensing low oxygen like at high altitude or with a pulmonary embolism. But central causes like anxiety, fever, or brain trauma can also directly stimulate that respiratory center.
And we even see it in pregnancy.
Routinely, progesterone acts as a central respiratory stimulant.
So the body has these built-in correction mechanisms. How does that compensation work between the lungs and the kidneys?
It's really a matter of speed versus thoroughness. The lungs provide a very prompt, almost immediate response for metabolic disorders. If your blood becomes too acidic for metabolic reasons, your lungs immediately start breathing faster and deeper to blow off CO2 and raise the pH. It's a minute-by-minute response.
But if the initial problem is in the lungs, the kidneys have to step in.
Yes. The kidneys compensate for the respiratory disorder by adjusting bicarbonate. But this is a slow, methodical response. Full compensation can take several days.
I know for our listeners, the clinical side of this is incredibly complex. If someone is sick, how do doctors use this system to figure out what's really going on?
They use blood gas analysis in ABG or VBG, and it's a very rigorous, stepwise approach. Clinicians don't just look at the raw numbers, they compare the measured values against calculated expected compensation values.
Why is that step necessary?
Because the body is always trying to compensate. If the measured values don't match what the expected compensation should be, if they're way off, it means there's more than one thing happening at the same time.
Mixed disorder.
That's how they identify a mixed acid-base disorder, which is far more common and much more challenging to treat. It just underscores how delicate that 7.35 to 7.45 range really is.
Before we leave chemistry, the sources highlighted a fascinating connection: the respiratory quotient.
The RQ, it's a measure of metabolism.
Yeah.
The ratio of CO2 produced to O2 consumed. Fat has a low RQ, around 0.7, and pure carbohydrate has an RQ of 1.0.
So if you're burning a lot of carbs, you're making a lot of CO2.
A lot of CO2 that the lungs have to clear. So if a patient is critically ill and you overfeed them, especially with excessive carbohydrates, you can push that RQ above 1.0.
And if their lungs are already compromised?
Precisely. They can't clear that extra CO2 load. This metabolic input can push them directly into hypercapnia and worsen their respiratory acidosis. It can be life-threatening. The takeaway is that your metabolism directly dictates the CO2 load your lungs must handle.
Wow, it turns eating into a high-stakes respiratory equation. Okay, let's pivot entirely now. Let's look at the history of this system. We're going back 400 million years to the Devonian period.
The Great Water-to-Land Transition. The sources show that acquiring an air-breathing structure was the key innovation for vertebrates to colonize land. But what's interesting is the challenge to the traditional view of how the lung evolved.
And the traditional view, based on mammals, was that lungs were always paired organs, right? Symmetrical pouches.
That's right. But new evidence from key bony fishes, the Osteichthyans, suggests that the ancestral lung was actually a median unpaired organ. It started developing ventrally underneath the foregut.
Where do we see evidence of this unpaired ancestor?
Look at the coelacanth. It's that famous deep-sea living fossil. It breathes with gills, but it still has a vestigial, single, unpaired lung. Even in modern lungfish, their structures are often secondary branches from a single connection, not true, simultaneously arising bilateral buds.
So the familiar paired lung we have is actually an evolutionary upgrade, an innovation just for the tetrapod lineage.
That's the conclusion. True paired lungs, where bilateral lung buds arise symmetrically, each connected directly to the trachea, that only evolved in the lineage leading to us, to tetrapods. It's a defining feature of our group.
And what was the driving force behind that shift? Why go from 1 to 2?
Surface area and capacity. To live on land, you needed a massive increase in the efficiency of gas exchange. Going bilateral dramatically increased the potential volume and surface area. That allowed for the higher metabolic rate you need for sustained activity and, critically, for supporting your body against gravity.
It was an essential change for life on land. To wrap up, let's look at a modern extreme. Deep-diving mammals like seals and whales. They've re-optimized this whole system.
They completely break the terrestrial mold. Most land mammals rely heavily on their lung oxygen stores. Deep divers, though, have small lung volumes, and they often dive after breathing out, which allows their lungs to fully collapse under pressure.
So if they aren't storing oxygen in their lungs, where is it?
They rely on massive stores in the blood and muscle. They can have blood oxygen stores up to 3 times higher than a land mammal, thanks to more hemoglobin, and their muscle oxygen stores from myoglobin can be 10 times higher. They've shifted their oxygen storage from air sacs to protein.
And their blood chemistry reflects that, right?
It does. In these extreme divers, where the lungs aren't the primary oxygen reservoir, the blood's oxygen affinity is often low.
Which seems counterintuitive.
It does, but that low affinity maximizes the unloading of oxygen from the blood directly to the tissues, ensuring vital organs get their supply during those long, deep, high-pressure dives. It's the ultimate specialized chemistry.
This deep dive has shown us just a huge span of complexity, from Boyle's law all the way to the evolution of the paired lung. We've seen how our ability to live hinges on a single iron atom in hemoglobin and that razor-thin margin of pH 7.35 to 7.45.
Understanding respiration really requires you to look at all those scales at once, from the molecular structure of 2-Kis-3-BTG all the way up to how the brainstem's inspiratory off switch manages rhythm.
We started by establishing that in a healthy person, the primary driver for breathing comes from the central chemoreceptors responding to a buildup of CO2. It's a waste management system.
Right. But the sources noted that in chronic high CO2 states like advanced emphysema or COPD, those central chemoreceptors become desensitized. The body just sort of gives up on managing the excess waste.
So what takes over?
The entire respiratory drive shifts almost exclusively to the peripheral chemoreceptors, which respond to a scarcity of fuel-low oxygen levels, or PO2.
So the provocative thought we leave you with is this. If the body switches its fundamental life-sustaining drive from managing an excess waste product to simply managing a deficit of fuel, what are the broader physiological and biological implications of that evolutionary trade-off for survival and quality of life in chronic disease? The goal changes completely, from eliminating the bad to desperately seeking the minimum required good.